Hi everyone, I hope you're doing well. In today's short lesson, we're going to look at these legal English words that begin with here and there. Welcome back to my Study Legal English YouTube channel. I'm Louise and I'm here to help you improve your legal English. Before we get started, please subscribe to my channel, hit the notification button to make sure that you're notified of all of my future legal English YouTube lessons. So now let's get started. So what will we look at in today's lesson? We're going to look at what are here and there words. What am I talking about? Should you understand them? How are they formed? Some examples of here and there words. Should you use them in legal English? And what do legal experts say about them? Finally, we're going to have a quiz, so stick around until the end to test your knowledge. So, first of all, what are here and there words? In legal English, here and there words, for example, herein, therein, are commonly used in legal drafting, for example, in contracts, in statutes, and other formal legal documents. On the positive side, they can help lawyers refer to different parts of a document or another item without repetition. But on the negative side, critics say that they are archaic, meaning that they sound old-fashioned. They are vague, meaning that they are ambiguous and not precise, and that they can confuse the reader. So I'm going to answer straight away, should you understand them? The answer is yes. I wouldn't be making this video if you didn't need to at least understand them. Yes, absolutely, you are going to come across these words as a lawyer. So let's look at the formation. Here on the left, you can see they are formed by an adverb, here and there, plus a preposition. For example, in, after, under, before, by, to, of, on, etc. And let's look at a short explanation of what they are. The here part usually refers to the document in which it is written, but it could also mean the section or clause in which it is written. The there part usually refers to something which is not the document or a section or clause of the document in which it is written, but instead a different document, section or clause, or another item or object. The preposition has its regular meaning, and you pronounce all of the parts separately. For example, herein, hereafter, even though those two parts of the word are joined together when you write it. Let's look specifically at some here words. Number one is herein. This means in this document, clause, or section. An example sentence is, this instrument, together with the instruments referred to herein, contains all the understandings and agreements of the parties. So herein means any instruments referred to in this document contains the understanding and the agreement of the parties. Hereby means by means of this document, clause or section. For example, the parties hereby agree to the following terms. The parties by signing, by executing this contract, simply by being parties to the agreement, they agree the following terms. Hereinafter means after in this document, clause or section. For example, this lease is made on a particular date between Maxco, hereinafter referred to as lessor, and Binks Ltd, hereinafter referred to as lessee. So later, after this particular part of the contract, the parties will not be referred to by their real registered company names. Instead, they will be referred to as their part in the contract as lessor or lessee. Hereunder means under, according to, as set out in this document, clause or section. For example, interest shall begin accruing upon the failure of buyer to pay in full any instalment that is due hereunder within 5 days of the instalment due date. Payment is due under the contract, according to this document, and if the buyer doesn't pay that within 5 days, interest will be applied and will start to accumulate. Hereto means to this document, clause or section. For example, the agreement is amended to include the revised Appendix A attached hereto. Appendix A is attached to this document. Herein above or herein before means above or before this document, clause or section. For example, payment for the services herein above described shall be made according to the schedule contained in Appendix 2. So, before, in the contract, the services are described. Hereof means of this document, clause or section. For example, closing date means the date when all conditions set out in Section 5.1 hereof are satisfied. Section 5.1 of this contract, of this document. So the important thing to remember here is that the here part refers to the document, the clause or a section in which the words are written, and the preposition just has the regular meaning. Let's move on to the there words. So we've got therein, which means in that document, section or clause or other item or object. For example, this agreement replaces and supersedes the prior supplier agreement and all terms therein. You've got one particular document in which this phrase is written, and we're referring to another document, which is a previous document that the parties agreed to, the supplier agreement, and all of the terms in the supplier agreement and the supplier agreement have been replaced by the current document. So therein refers to the supplier agreement, which is not this agreement where we find this phrase. Thereby means by means of that document, section or clause or another item or object. For example, the lessee shall secure all relevant construction permits and shall thereby be compliant with zoning requirements. By obtaining all the construction permits, the lessee is going to be compliant with a particular requirement. Thereafter means after that document, section or clause, other item or object, for example, a date. Let's see here, we've got the term of this agreement shall begin on the effective date and shall continue for a period of 6 years thereafter, meaning the term. So the thereafter here means after the date that I just mentioned. And the date that I just mentioned is not this document, this section, this clause. It's another thing. It's a date, right? And so we use thereafter, not hereafter. Thereunder means according to or as set out in that document, section or clause or other item, object that we have mentioned. For example, the employee or employee shall receive insurance coverage and must notify employer of any claim thereunder. So according to the document in which this is written, the employee has a right to have insurance. They can make claims under that insurance. But if they do indeed make a claim, which is an action related to another document, which is not this document in which we find these words, if that happens, the employee must notify the employer. If the employee makes a claim under the insurance document or according to the insurance document, then they need to notify the employer. Thereto means to that document, section or clause or other item or object. For example, the successful party in any suit related to this agreement may recover its reasonable attorney's fees related thereto. Related to the suit, related to the court action. So we're talking about the ability of a party to recover legal fees related to a lawsuit, the lawsuit being another object, another item, which is not the document where we find these words. Thereof means of that document, section or clause or other item or object. For example, EXW means EXW USA, LLC, and any parent, affiliates, or subsidiaries thereof. We're talking about the parents, affiliates, or subsidiaries of EXW USA, LLC. All of those companies are included in the defined term, which is EXW. And finally, thereon. That means on that document, section or clause or other item or object, not on this document where we find the writing. For example, upon default, the lender may by written notice to the company, declare all or any portion of the unpaid amount together with all accrued interest thereon immediately payable. So if the company does not pay, if they are in default, in this situation, the lender can send written notice to the company requesting that the money due, the borrowed amount, is payable immediately, and related to that payable amount, interest accrues on that amount. Interest on the amount payable is also due immediately. And of course, the amount of money due is not the current document in which we find this writing. So we're using there to refer to something else, this thing other than where we find this phrase. So those are some important there words. Hopefully you've understood that the there part refers to something which is not the document in which this is written, not the clause in which this is written, but something else that's mentioned there. We can find it elsewhere, and the preposition has the regular meaning. So should you use these words? Here on the left, you can see a meme that has been circulating on social media. It's actually a Turkish chef in the photo. And here, of course, this is a bit humorous. We can see lawyers adding legal flavour to contracts, just spicing it up a bit with words like hereby, herein, thereof, adding a bit of legalese simply to give your writing that legal flavour. It's funny, but the sad reality is that this can be what some people do. So should you use them? My questions to you would be, are you using here and there words simply just to sound like a lawyer? Are you just adding them in to give a bit of legal flavour to your writing? If your answer is yes, is this a good reason? So you may respond yes and yes. This is your choice whether you use these or not. I'm not going to dictate to you whether you should use them, because at the end of the day, these words are a matter of style. Whether you prefer a more traditional, archaic approach, or whether you prefer a more modern, plain English approach. However, if you do use them, there are things that you absolutely need to be aware of to try to use them more accurately and precisely. So let's continue on and let's think about, what do the experts think, okay? So I've got two quotes here from some legal experts. The first one, which I really like, is this. He's talking about, of course, here and there words, okay? These abound in legal writing. Unfortunately, they do not occur just here and there, usually thrown in gratuitously, to give legal documents that musty legal smell. That's Brian Garner in Garner's Dictionary of Legal Usage, a book that I highly recommend you get. So he means that here, there words are everywhere in legal writing, unfortunately, not just here and there. They're not just like we come across them rarely. They're thrown in gratuitously, meaning lawyers just put them into their legal writing without even thinking about it, to give that smell of old legal offices. Musty means dusty, old, mouldy, what you might associate with a really old law firm. The next quote is from Ken Adams, my favourite writer on contracts. He says, don't use herein, hereunder, and other here and there words. Not only are they archaic, they create confusion. And that's in Ken Adams's article, Herein, and I need a label for this kind of ambiguity, on his blog. So you can check that out at that link there. So Ken is quite strong in his opinion in that you really don't need to use these words. Why? Because they sound so traditional, so old-fashioned, and not only that, they cause confusion. But why? If you're still thinking, but I quite like these words, I want to use them. Why are they ambiguous? This is something that you need to pay attention to if you are still wanting to use these words. The main issue is that the here, there words could refer to this or that contract, document, or only a part of it. For example, a section, a clause, or subsection. And this is a real ambiguity. This has resulted in court cases, disputes between parties, where on the one hand a party has argued that the herein, the therein, has only referred to a part, and the other party has argued the opposite. Actually, that word refers to the whole document. There's case law in England, in America, over these words. So fundamentally, they cause disputes. They are not precise in themselves. So if you choose to use these words, you are using them knowing that they create ambiguity. I want to make that clear. But you might be thinking, but Louise, I still would quite like to use these words. They sound so lawyerly. Well, if you insist that you really want to use these words despite all of the things that I'm telling you here, how could you be more precise with them? In the contracts interpretation section, or whatever you're writing, if you're writing an email, if you're writing a memo, you need to clarify the scope of your here, there words. So if you're writing a contract, you can put that in the interpretation section. For example, all terms prefixed with here, including herein, hereby, hereafter, hereto, hereunder, and hereof, shall be interpreted to refer to this agreement as a whole, its provisions and any attachments or annexes, and not to a specific section, clause, or subsection. Of course, you could write the opposite, that actually every time you use here or there words, you're referring to specific parts, not to the whole. If you do this, at least you are using these words with more precision. You're not just leaving their meaning open to interpretation, and there always is differing interpretations related to these words. Let me continue on this topic. How could you be more precise? In our book, Natasha Costello and I suggest some alternatives to using these words. We're not the only people to do this. You can find alternatives to using these words everywhere, okay? But, of course, I recommend our book. We have in Appendix 2 a Legalese to Plain English quick reference where you can find various Legalese words and a replacement option. For example, hereby, you can say by this document, by this agreement, by this particular action, whatever it is that you're really referring to. Herein, you can say in this document, agreement, clause, section, whatever it is you're referring to. Hereinafter, afterwards in this document agreement. If you're in the habit of using hereinafter, as we saw in our example earlier, for example, in definitions, it can be simply removed. Hereinafter referred to as the company, you can simply put in quotation marks, company. This is the modern trend now in contracts to make them easier to read. Herein before, you can simply say before in this document, agreement, clause, whatever it is. Here to this document, agreement, clause. You get the idea, right? If you want to write more precisely and clearly, you're actually writing what it is you mean instead of using these words. Having said that, let's come back to Ken Adams, because Ken Adams does have an exception to his rule of do not use these words. Let's come back to his quote, okay, don't use herein, hereunder, and other here and there words. Not only are they archaic, they create confusion. He then goes on to say, the one exception is hereby, used in language of performance, as in Acme hereby grants the license to Smith. So Ken views hereby as a valid exception. You could, according to him, use hereby because it actually has a function. He calls it language of performance. What is language of performance? So Ken Adams, he's the author of a manual of style for contract drafting. He categorizes contract language into various categories, including language of performance, as I just mentioned, language of obligation, language of discretion, prohibition, and a few other categories as well. And he recommends that, within your contract, you're always using language for a specific thing, and that you should be very methodical with the type of language you use when you're drafting your contracts to be as clear, as precise as possible. So he recommends language verb structures to use for each of these categories. Regarding language of performance, he suggests that for language of performance, you should use hereby plus the simple present. The context of language of performance, what is it? It expresses actions performed by signing the contract. For example, Acme hereby purchases the assets from Jackson. Hereby, by signing the contract, the purchase is happening. You can have the lessor hereby grants the lease to lessee. By this agreement, the license or the lease is granted. And if you're interested in this, you might be interested in Ken Adams's LinkedIn post here. I've captured it from LinkedIn. Ken said, "My categories of contract language framework is perhaps the most consequential part of a manual of style for contract drafting. If you're not familiar with the concept, it will rock your world." Seriously, smiley face. I just posted on my blog the categories of contract language quick reference chart from the 5th edition. A link to the blog post is in the first comment, and you can see that link is actually here. So I highly recommend that, you get Ken's book if you're interested in contract drafting, and especially if you're interested in the language of contracts, that you go ahead and check out his framework here on this link. You should probably also follow him on LinkedIn. Okay, so let's move on. We're going to do a quiz. Plain English to Legalese quiz, first of all. So I'm going to give you some sentences. You need to fill in the gap with some here or there words. The parties, by signing this document, agree to the terms and conditions set forth in this agreement. Number 2. The information provided in the document is considered confidential. In this document, we should say. The buyer and seller, in and after these words in the document, referred to as the parties, acknowledge their obligations. Number 4. Any disputes arising from the master agreement, the master agreement being another document, not this one, shall be resolved according to the terms outlined in that document in the master agreement. Number 5, any amendments to the contract attached to this email must be attached to the contract referred to in this email and signed. Okay, so you might want to pause the video here to have a quick look at those and to fill in the gaps, because now we're going to look at the answers. First of all, number 1, the parties, by signing this agreement, agree to the terms and conditions set forth in this agreement. The answer is hereby, by signing this document. The next one, the information provided in this document is considered confidential. It should be herein, in this document. The buyer and seller, in and after these words, we're looking for hereinafter. Next one. Any disputes arising from the master agreement shall be resolved according to the terms outlined therein, in that document, in the master agreement. And finally, any amendments to the contract attached to this email must be attached thereto and signed. You're writing an email, but you're referring to attaching to a contract amendments. Let's do now legalese to plain English. So we're doing the opposite. I'm going to give you some sentences with these here, there words, and you need to rewrite it in a plain English way, replacing those here, there words. Number 1, the obligations set forth herein shall be binding on both parties. Payments due hereunder shall be made within 30 days of the invoice date. The seller warrants that the goods described herein above meet the agreed specifications. If a party receives a notice of termination, all obligations shall cease thereafter. And finally, number 5, I'm writing to let you know that the parties have agreed on the dispute resolution clause for the sale of good agreement and have agreed that any dispute arising in relation thereto shall be resolved through arbitration. It's a long sentence, that one. You could probably actually change quite a lot there. But we're just looking at the here and the there words. So let's go ahead and look at the answers. If you haven't finished yet, pause the video, finalise your answers, and then come back and listen to the answers. So the quiz answers. Number 1, the obligations set forth herein, you can say in this agreement, shall be binding on both parties. Number 2, payments due hereunder, under this agreement. You could probably even delete this. Payments due shall be made within 30 days of the invoice date, especially if payments is a defined term in the contract and you're using it here as a defined term. What other payments are we talking about? Number 3, the seller warrants that the goods described here and above. Specify, be specific. The seller warrants that the goods described in section 5 meet the agreed specifications. However, again, you're talking about the goods meeting the specifications. The goods here is a defined term. So what other goods are we talking about? You don't need the here and above or in section 5. You can simply say the seller warrants that the goods meet the agreed specifications. Number 4, if a party receives a notice of termination, all obligations shall cease thereafter. If a party receives a notification of termination, all obligations shall cease. Here you can simply delete thereafter. Or be more specific. Are we talking about the obligations ceasing immediately, upon receipt of the notice, upon the sending of the notice? Try to be more specific there, unless your intention really is to be vague, which it may well be. Contracts are the result of negotiations. You don't always get an agreement on precise language. And number 5, I'm writing to let you know that the parties have agreed on the dispute resolution clause for the sale of good agreement and have agreed that any disputes arising in relation thereto, in relation to it, shall be resolved through arbitration. So you can simply say to it or to the agreement. So I hope you did well in that quiz. Let me know how you did in the comments section. So that brings us to the end of this short lesson. I hope you enjoyed it and I hope that you learned something new. If there are other legal English topics that you'd like to learn about, drop a comment in the comment section below and I'll do my best to cover that in a future lesson. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel. You can also find me on Instagram. My Instagram profile is @legalenglisher. And you can join my Study Legal English Facebook group. Just search for Study Legal English on Facebook. If you liked this lesson, hit the thumbs up button and do me a favour, share this with a friend, a colleague, share it on social media. It really helps me to grow my channel. So thanks for watching and see you next time.